Tonight, let's talk about a simple practice, a very simple practice, actually. And that practice is noticing things as they arise, are as they are, like this. For example, this moment, however it appears to you, maybe curious, maybe restless, maybe bored, maybe anticipation, maybe sleepy, as it is. And we can notice that our experiences are always changing, always sort of morphing one into the next. The challenging ones seem to stay around longer than we'd like. The really enjoyable ones don't stay around quite as long as we'd like. But in either case, they're always changing. Right? Not permanent in any way. Pace might vary from certain situations, might last decades, but the moment-to-moment feeling about them might vary many times just throughout a single day. Right? So we can see that there are experiences that we sort of assign to the outside world, things that happen sort of outside our skin that we perceive. And those experiences may have a certain flavor. Again, always changing, always unique. And then there's also our inner experiences, often in reaction to the outer experiences, right? So the two aren't unrelated most of the time. And we can try to step in and manage, either the outer or the inner experiences. For what purpose? To improve our sense of well-being, right? To gain pleasure, to feel more comfortable, to feel more at ease, to feel safer in the world, those kinds of things. We can notice that there's always this, tends to be this relationship between what's happening and then how we feel about what's happening. So that's the relationship. So what's happening may be just factual. Tonight my mind is busy. It's just a statement of fact. We're not condemning it. We're not bemoaning it. We're just stating a fact, if that's the case. What we tell ourselves about that is a whole nother mental overlay. Like, well, that shouldn't be happening. I've been meditating for a quarter of a century and, I shouldn't have a busy mind and maybe I'm not making any progress at all. And what's this all about? And, we can just go down that track. But the raw fact of it is that our mind happens to be busy that night, period, end of story. Right? So if it's stated just as a fact without an emotional undertone happening, then it's just as it is, right? So when we talk about, any experience, whether outer or inner, being as it is, if we just see it that plainly, we're actually able to see it more clearly because we're not engaging in other layers of, whether we like it, whether we don't, whether we agree with it or not, whether it's fair, just. Those are all mental overlays on what may be, whatever the experience is. We don't have to just be talking about difficult circumstances. We could say the same thing about, pleasant circumstances. That they are too always changing, and we have a relationship with those. We'd like them to continue, hopefully, even better, more, longer, right? More exciting, leading to higher and higher adventures, higher and higher states, more and more spiritual experiences. So we can have as much as we might have a relationship with challenging circumstances, arguing with those, being opposed to those, we can also have a relationship with pleasurable experiences, not being quite satisfied with them, trying to amp them up for every bit of pleasure that we can get, extend them, figure out ways to enhance the pleasure. Maybe we've just eaten a perfectly wonderful meal. We feel quite full, but then there's dessert, maybe even a little better, and then maybe there's the after dinner drink, and then maybe there's a, sort of add to the pleasure, and all of those things may be fine, right? Nothing wrong with enjoying possibilities of pleasure in this life. It's not the whether we eat the dessert or don't. It's more the attitude of whether that dessert will bring us happiness, and whether we're seeking it out of a sense of need, or it's more just a joyful experience of this very human body form, capacity to enjoy, not seeing it as something to fulfill some inner lack. Right? It's more an enjoyment rather than a need. Like, I need that to feel okay. If I don't have that, then I won't feel complete. That movement. Right? So it can be, what we're talking about here can be either outside or inside. It can be positive or negative, so-called experiences. Just having a relationship with those. So there's the actual, plain, description of the event, what it is, and then there's our judgment about it, whether or not it's of benefit to this organism, to the well-being of this body mind, of advantage to me. Right? That's the extra little twist there. So this practice that we're talking about tonight is very simple, yet quite profound, actually. And the practice is when we experience whatever the state or mood or feeling or thought process or experience, whatever it is that we happen to catch our attention in that moment, we can see that it has the nature of just being as it is, like this, right? Whatever the moment is, it has a very unique flavor, exactly like that will never be repeated. Right? It's just a unique moment in the timeless now, right? As a result of everything that's gone before, all the causes and conditions, all the situations, and yielding this particular situation, this particular inner experience, maybe this particular thought that is arising. And when whatever that is, it doesn't have to be extraordinary. It can be quite mundane. It can be uncomfortable. It can be wonderful. Whatever the experience is, if we can just slow down enough to notice that it is like this, however that is, right? So it's a way to sort of not approach everything from a very personal perspective, like what's in it for me? Is this helpful? Not fun? Not. Do I like it? Is it good? Is it bad? Those are all very human imposed overlays onto whatever may be happening. But if we just stick with the actual event, again, whether outer or inner, then it's just like this. And by reminding ourselves of that simple fact, so it's not a judgment, it's not a put down, and it's also not an avoidance. It's not a means to diminish the significance of this incredible creation, right? And it's actually just the opposite. And actually, by removing, all of the ideas that we may hold about the event, it actually allows us to see what's happening much more clearly, because we're not viewing it through this personal filter. We're just seeing it as it is, right? So it's also not meant to sort of suck the joy out of every event, but it's seeing that what is happening is as it is, and each of those very unique moments in our life can be appreciated. It doesn't mean that we have to like them, right? It doesn't mean that we have to love them. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with them. But we can appreciate just the uniqueness of them, the fact that they're occurring at all. The fact that we have this incredible capacity to be present for the existence in this lifetime, right? Just that. However the experience shows up, right? So just coming back to this practice of, oh, this moment is like this, and it sort of removes all the ways that we might typically distract ourselves into thinking about the situation, and leaves us just with the direct perception of what is, right? So it's just a very simple reminder to come back to that. And it's what it does is sort of takes away the drama, the drama that we create in our own minds when we start to label things as right or wrong, good or bad, should or shouldn't, who's to blame, who's guilty, those kind of judgments that we impose on the situation sort of rev up our reactivity, our emotions. And the way to use this phrase is not in a dismissive way. Oh, it's just like this, or just as a sort of mindless mantra. Oh, just this, just this, just this. It's not a dismissive thing at all. It's actually more like an invitation to really notice the actuality of the experience rather than focusing on how it affects me, my life. Right? So it's sort of a way to remove the get the personal out of the experience. So these, so what we're talking about in terms of, let's say, suffering, forms of suffering, um, it can be personal, a personal situation, something that happens directly to us, or it could be, more diffuse in terms of, viewing the suffering of the world. Because as we've talked about before, we view the world, and it seems like there's no end to the possibilities for suffering. I mean, even the essential um, makeup, how we all survive on this planet, um, is very much based on this life form eating that life form. I tried to think of if any life forms I could think of didn't depend on consuming another life form, whether alive or recently deceased. Um, it was a really short list that I came up with. The only one I could come up with actually was a hummingbird. You know, maybe there are others. I'm sure there are, but that's all that I could come up with. Even honeybees, which are, everybody likes, at least in theory. I mean, even they sort of kill off their drones in September in order not to have to feed them all winter. Drones are the males, by the way. So it's hard to find a life form that isn't based on consuming others. So that, at a very raw level, um, there's a certain amount of built-in possibility for suffering on this planet. Um, but we can see, we could watch a nature film and, see a lion and an antelope, and it's pretty vicious. But we don't really assign guilt. We don't really say, well, the lion shouldn't have done that. I mean, because it's their nature. Much like a house cat might, kill the birds at the bird feeder. I mean, it's just their nature to do that. You can't really scold the cat, to not act like that. So there's a built-in behavior for a lot of the life forms on this planet, and for humans to a certain extent. However, there's a lot of suffering. Seems like an awful lot these days that is caused by human unconsciousness, and that suffering isn't, well, it's necessary in one sense because that's what's happening, and a consequence of lack of awareness of who we truly are. But it's not necessary in another sense because we, as humans, have the tools available, well, at least within the realm of communications, to find our way out of that, into a recognition of our underlying essential undifferentiated awareness. And when that can be recognized, then it transforms how we view other people, how we view other life forms, how we view the planet, how we view our position in that structure in the world. So there is a possibility to see our way out of that. And in fact, the suffering is often very much a part of that journey to discover what we truly are. Without the suffering that we have likely experienced in our own life, could we say with any certainty that we would be interested in trying to get to the root of our existence now? It's almost like the suffering is the stick, and the hope of recognition of our true nature is the carrot, right? So we could say that suffering actually is almost an essential part of this process to push us as humans into greater recognition of what we truly are. So Adyashanti once talked about how when he was first asked to teach by his teacher, Parvis Justi, that she gave him some suggestions, some things to remember that would be useful in his teachings. And one of them was a bit harsh when you first hear it, but there's a deeper truth in it. And what she told him was to be careful, to be cautious about how much suffering you remove from another person, because it may be just that suffering that is necessary for that person's awakening. So it sounds harsh, right? But what she was pointing to is the actual cure, right? That the suffering has the potential to bring us to a point of discovering what we truly are. And that's of far greater importance than just to relieve some symptoms of discomfort, in a way that isn't really long-lasting. I've had a chance in the last couple of weeks to talk with someone who has had let's say, a checkered history with drug abuse. And in talking with this person, it became apparent that they hadn't yet suffered enough. They hadn't really gotten to the bottom of it to realize that that wasn't a fruitful avenue. So as long as there's still hope that there is a possibility that that will provide relief, liberation, if even temporary, then very hard to get out of that. It's almost like suffering wasn't yet enough. You can have sympathy, but sometimes things need to play out in the way they need to play out. And just trying, just say no, just trying to do the right thing, it's not powerful enough. Okay, so this coming back to this sense of just noticing that the experience, whatever it happens to be at the moment, is just like this. So again, we're not being dismissive of the experience. We're not trying to ignore it. We're not trying to change it. We're just allowing, bringing our attention to it, really, just to really get the flavor of it, appreciate the uniqueness of it. We don't have to even like it to do that. It just requires some curiosity, some interest. It's something that, the whole of existence has served up in this moment. Do we want to pay attention or not, right? Do we want to argue with it? Well, that shouldn't happen. Or do we want to just slow down enough to say, well, I wonder if there's something in this moment to learn, the uniqueness of this experience, this perception, this thought, this feeling, whatever it is. And by just sort of pulling the emotional overlay out of it by acknowledging that it's like this. So it's really just an acknowledgement. It's not trying to categorize anything. It's not trying to even describe anything. It's really just pointing, this experience, notice it in this moment. It's like this, right? You get the flavor of it? So I said at the beginning that it's very simple, but actually quite profound practice, um, and it actually incorporates. There's sort of three fundamental tenets in Buddhism that are meant to sort of point out the fundamental nature of human existence, and sort of like a three-legged stool. And this practice actually deals with all three legs at once with one simple practice. And those three aspects that Buddha pointed out are that the nature of existence is that it's always changing. It's not permanent. Things come and go, right? So when an experience happens and we notice, oh, this experience is like this, the experience 2 minutes ago was different, but this that I'm experiencing right now is like this, always changing. And this practice just brings our attention to that changefulness, but also holds us in the present moment for what's happening now. So it not only points it out, it actually um, allows us to participate fully in that um, flux of life, right? So the other leg of the stool that Buddha talked about was this nature of human existence is um, discomfort, suffering, not enough, not quite right, but that kind of feeling. And again, this practice, just by pointing out the actuality of the practice, sort of pulls our attention away from all the ways that we characterize it. Like this experience is okay, but I'd rather be doing something else. It's not good enough. This shouldn't have happened. All the things that we can tell ourselves about the experience rather than just being with the experience directly. Just the facts, right? Just how things arise. Everything else is filtered through our eyes, our thoroughly conditioned eyes. So we tend to see it from a very personal place. And it's seeing it through, it's not so much the event itself that is maybe challenging, maybe causes some pain. It's not often not the event itself nearly as much as what we tell ourselves about the event. Why it shouldn't have happened, why the other person's really to blame, not me. How I'll never forgive the other person for this. Right. I'm right. They're wrong. All of those things. All of those things get our juices flowing, right? And that's what actually causes us to suffer much, much more than the actual event. So again, this practice is pointing out the actuality of the whatever's happening, and taking our attention away from all of these secondary emotional reactivity that we add on to, that extra energy that we add on to the actual event. So in that sense, it actually works with this second leg of the stool, this idea of suffering, by redirecting our attention to the actuality of the event rather than how we argue with that actuality. And the third way it works with it is, third leg of the stool is this sense of not self, right? Not personal, right? So by treating the experience, again, whether outer or inner thoughts, feelings, circumstances, by focusing on the actuality of the feeling or the thought without the labeling and without the judgment about it, it removes approaching that feeling or situation from a personal perspective, right? The personal perspective isn't necessary because, by just allowing it to be as it is, just like this, we've sort of removed the necessity for a managerial mind to step in and evaluate whether it's good or not for us, right? Will it make me happy? Won't it? Tune in tomorrow. And then things are just as they are. In this situation, this moment, it feels like this. And again, this isn't dismissive, and it's not meant to sort of ignore what's happening. It's actually meant to free us up from this, personal perspective to allow us to see things as they actually are. Another way to look at it is by stepping away from that sense of how does this affect me, we can just take sort of a more elevated view. I'm not talking about morally or spiritually, but just almost like photographically, step back to take in a bigger picture. So, what as we step back, we see more and more the greater landscape, how things relate with each other, the causes and effects, how different people may interact within a certain situation. And from that perspective, we're much more likely and much more able to respond with something that is really for the highest and best good of all involved, which is quite different than what's best for me. If we're coming from this very personal space, looking at whatever happens through that filter of, how's it going to affect me personally? And then step back into this larger view. Our actions are much more likely to be helpful to the greater good, a solution that is the best possible for the situation. That may not be best for me personally, but it's what the situation requires. So by being willing to see what is happening from the perspective of, well, in this moment, it's like this. Just the simple facts, unadorned, don't require that emotional overlay. They're just like this. Still allows us to enjoy them, still allows us to fully participate, but we're just not arguing with how things are showing up in that moment. Much more curious, right? Curious about the uniqueness of it. So there was a spiritual teacher, I think back in the last century, I'm not sure. He's no longer with us at any rate. But Franklin Merrill Wolf had a term that he called high indifference, right? Which is sort of what we're talking about. It's not like ordinary indifference where you just don't care enough to be interested, couldn't be bothered. It's not that at all. He called it high indifference, which is being fully present, without getting sucked into the emotional overlay of whatever's happening. For example, if you're, I don't know, let's say you're going in for a surgery. I mean, you want your the surgeon to be fully present, right? But you don't want them to be emotionally involved in what's happening. You want them fully focused on doing the best they possibly can, without, without fear, without, you know, worry about whether they're doing it right or not. You want them just to, use their training to the fullest possible sense, but, be entirely present for that, without judgment, without, having a judgment about whether you deserve to be saved or not, those kind of things. You want them just to be present, right? Be present for. In a similar way is true as if, somebody's really struggling, suffering, maybe something happened, at work, their boss said something to them, they're feeling awful, they're feeling like unworthy, that they might have been unjustifiably accused, their boss was wrong, caught in that whole drama, right? So if you're with such a person, what gift can you give them, right? Is it more of a gift to sort of collaborate with them, like saying, well, no, you're right, your boss is awful, they shouldn't have done that? I mean, that kind of advice just to actually, builds up that sense of righteousness, that it keeps the juices flowing, and I would suggest what's actually much more helpful is to be present to listen non-judgmentally, but not engage in the drama, not collaborate with the drama, because there's, in terms of changing the other person's behavior in that moment, that's what happened, so again, we can, approach it more from the position of, in that situation, it was like this. That's how it appeared. That's how life appeared in that moment. And then the person is perhaps sees the wisdom of recognizing that event transpired as it did, and now there's a possibility to see how this current moment is. In this current moment, there's maybe this upset. We can see that life is appearing like this, upset. And again, if we don't judge ourselves or the other person for that, then it's just upset. If we're not fueling that fire with all the shoulds and rights and wrongs, it doesn't tend to last all that long. Because we've pulled the plug out of the wall where it was being generated from. All the overlays about shoulds and shouldn'ts, and we can see, maybe our own role in it, maybe, whether the situation is suitable for us, whatever we might take away from it, but by allowing ourselves to extract ourselves from the drama of it, it can be seen more clearly, and we're left with the ability to decide how to respond, rather than be dragged around in a state of reaction. Okay, so this practice has everything to do with this very fundamental aspect of Buddhism, the idea of ever-changing world of form. Easy enough to see. Implications are a little more profound. Seeing this sort of fundamental nature, especially in the way the human mind tends to um, spend a lot of time looking out for itself, creates a suffering for themselves and others. You can see the source of that. Source of that is trying to manage life, right? Trying to make it better for who? Me, right? More of the pleasure, less of the pain. Grabbing this, pushing that away. So that movement, trying to amplify, our sense of well-being and trying to stay out of harm's way as best we can. So that movement has everything to do with a sense of suffering during this lifetime. And the third way is just taking everything personally, which is it's a belief structure, that's what I need to do, that I can't trust life, that I have to sort of take care of my own interests first. That's what's really important, not so much what's needed for the situation. So those three aspects, we can see it, this one very simple practice actually penetrates all three of those quite deeply, if we really use it. My suggestion is to not wait for like high drama. Use it for everyday situations first. Get used to it. And we can see that if we just allow things to be as they are, it's like things will still be as they are. It doesn't mean that they'll necessarily be easier, but it's like the difference between watching a horse race and betting on a horse race that you're watching. If you're emotionally entangled in it, it has a whole different sense than if you're just present for. So that's the opportunity there. And again, when we use the technique, this just is allowing things to be just like this, whatever it is that shows up. It doesn't mean to categorize it. It's like, oh, this time it's like this, and that time it's like that. Just to really be curious about and see whatever needs to be revealed. Right? It also doesn't require that we wait for a particular really, really exciting experience sometime in the future. Right? In any moment will do. Right? Because in every moment there's a possibility to recognize our true essence, and this practice is very useful for doing that because it allows things to be seen that normally draw our entire attention to, and by sort of just kind of de-energizing those de-energizing emotional contraction around what's arising, then it's much more likely that we'll see what's actually happening. One of which is the awareness that notices all of that. So that's the opportunity there, and it just allows us to interact with life fully, right? Because we're not in opposition to it. We're just acknowledging that, yes, in this moment it's like this.